Hello, and welcome to our third installment of the Artist Talks with the Jurors Invitational 2020. My name is Sean Barnes. I'm the gallery coordinator at the Leonore R. Fuller Gallery in the Kenneth J. Minart Center for the Arts at South Puget Sound Community College. And I'm talking today with Jay Shepard. Jay Shepard is a native Washingtonian, a longtime Olympia resident and artist, and regular contributor to exhibitions at the Leo Fuller Gallery. Jay has his MFA from Arizona State University and is a member of the Woodturners of Olympia and has served on its board. He's also a member of the American Association of Woodturners. Jay is a nationally recognized award-winning artist who has shown in Pennsylvania, Missouri, Arizona, Minnesota, and at many locations around the state. Hello, Jay Shepard, and thank you so much for inviting us into your studio.
Hi.
Hello. So Jay, I've admired your work for several years now, particularly, your use of how you use vessels and the painted surfaces together. I was wondering if you could walk us through your process of blending woodworking and painting. Maybe what are your tools and, paint, the types of wood, things like that.
Sure. As you mentioned, I have an MFA in painting and drawing, and that's kind of where it all started. And to make a long story short, I got into woodworking several years ago out of necessity. I made furniture for myself, and then continued painting, but nonetheless, the woodworking bug kind of got into me. And one day I made a tabletop, and I said that tabletop needs round legs, and it didn't. I had my table saw; I could make square legs, but I needed a lathe. So I went out and bought a used lathe off of Craigslist. It was a 1939 vintage Delta, and I turned the legs, and I thought, wow, this is a lot of fun. And I never finished the table. And I've been turning wood ever since. I went to a meeting of the Woodturners of Olympia, and those guys know wood turning really well. I met a particular fellow, his name's Steve Hatcher. He's an internationally known wood turner right here in Olympia. His work is very beautiful. Yeah, if you can, check it out. And he showed me a lot of techniques of how to embellish your turnings, but I'm a painter, so I couldn't resist applying paint to my pieces, and consequently here we are. I used to paint very big paintings, and this is much more intimate, and I can talk about that a little later. How do you process? You talked about process. Well, it starts with a piece of wood. Looks like something like this. Looks like a hunk of firewood. This is a piece of big leaf maple. I source my material from local sources, and go around cutting trees down. There are windfalls. A neighbor might have a windfall tree come down, or within our group, the club. People contact the club all the time and say, I've got a tree that's come down, or I've got a bunch of wood to get rid of, and we source it that way. So we don't. We salvage wood. So, and I feel pretty good about that. It's kind of like recycling. But eventually, I'll take that chunk of firewood and cut it on the bandsaw and make a blank like this, and start turning it to a cylinder. This will be a nice vessel. It's not hollowed yet. The hollowing process takes some time, but eventually I'll end up with a blank vessel. And this is one, for example, that I have prepared. I've got ready to start painting. So
and that piece, can you show us the inside? That piece has been hollowed out already?
Yeah, this has been hollowed out now. And the foot's been cut, turned. And I use a hunk of wood like this as a handle, so I can turn it and while I'm painting and not mess it up with my hands. I've found that airbrushing is a tool that I use, an airbrush. I use this. This is an Iwata. I have several Iwata airbrushes. This one is the one I'm kind of into right now. It's a trigger as opposed to the press and pull. I find that that's more easier to control. In college, I did some airbrush paintings. They were big. One was like 7 by 10 foot image of a face. So that's kind of where I got introduced to airbrushing. But I find that it's very, I can use it on this kind of stuff really well. I also use paint brushes as well, and I do paint pieces as well. And if you bring on, well, this one's called Continuum, and I think you have it an image.
I do, yeah. Let me bring that up real quick here. And there it is.
There it is.
It's beautiful.
That is kind of a base of airbrush and a lot of hand brush with a ArtTalk paintbrush. So.
Yeah, and also it reveals something about the material on the cap, and you can see that wood grain in there. And
yeah,
the wood grain is mimicked in the brushwork and even in the shape of the vessel. Those gentle curves. Yeah, it's lovely.
The top is Madrona burl, and then the rest of it is a maple. And it's airbrushed initially, and then I went in with the paintbrush, as I mentioned. I'm really quite fond of this one because it's reminiscent of a lot of my paintings that I've done in the past.
Yeah, the more abstract work, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that so that kind of brings me to something else that I was curious about in your work, which was you mentioned these early art influences, and in your biography and your statements, you mentioned particularly the gestural and sometimes minimal works of the abstract expressionist painters like Mark Rothko, Barnett Newman, just to name a few of your influences. But what particularly was that shift from working on like a two-dimensional canvas and then working 3 dimensions in wood? You talked about out of necessity, but was there something that you weren't getting from painting on a canvas that you now find in wood? Do you still work on canvas, I guess, is another question.
My paintings were large, a minimum of 4 by 5 feet and bigger, large gestural paintings, and they did evoke this more lyrical space. And I think that they were large and intimidating for a lot of folks. When I brought that imagery down to the smaller scale, it became a more intimate experience, something that somebody could hold, be present with in a much easier way, and experience it. You could hold this thing and just kind of turn it and look at it. There's a sensuousness, not only, we talk about sensuousness as a tactile thing, but visual sensuality about these things that I go for. And you can dive deep into these things and get lost for hours.
Yeah.
At least minutes.
Yeah, and so I can see how how wood turning like has impacted the effect on as a maker, as an artist, has impacted the way you work and how you work. Um, but there's something I'm thinking about too, because you don't just make these art vessels that are for like an art object in a gallery or whatever. You're also producing these to have a particular function, right? You know, I'm speaking about um, the, don't you sell these as urns also?
Oh yeah, I do make urns, and mostly for people I have known,
Yeah,
and that's another experience.
yeah, of
But
course.
um, mostly though, I prefer to think these as art objects. The idea of one of these things just simply being a vase, even though we call them a vase to hold flowers. I don't.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me. The other thing is, early on, I wanted to be a potter, and I threw a lot of pots, and I was really into pottery. But when I went to school, I got bit by the painting bug, and so at any rate, that information, that experience with pottery informed me about form and shape, uh, and so that when I got into wood turning, it was like a fish to water. It was really easy to make that transition uh, into the turned wood pieces.
So there are these wonderful concepts that I think you know, these objects evoke you, and the concepts and your process spans, you know, several disciplines from painting and these kind of pottery forms and also wood turning. Um, but they're evocative of these like cosmological mythologies too. They point to a kind of fusion of heaven and earth in a way. Um, can you talk a little bit about the relationships between the spirituality, the vessels, and the universes that you paint on them? The kind of intimacy that's there.
That's probably the most intimate part of my work, um, and it's the hardest part to talk about. I really believe that one experiences art. Um, some people walk in and say, "What is it?" And what I want to ask people to do is go in and experience the art and get out of their brain, the think part of their brain, into the emotional side, and have them feel it and get into the emotions of experiencing that piece. And what does it do for them? What emotion does that evoke? Um, and that to me gets into this spirituality of us as humans, wondering who we are and how we got here and what is our place in this universe. And the imagery, especially this kind of imagery, again, back on continuum here, uh, is inspired by what's out there. You know, we don't, you know, our minds are so limited as to our experience here on this planet that there's so much more out there. And so a lot of times I just sit down and imagine that.
Mhm.
It's about imagining what could be out there and what else is meant to be out there. And you know, not be limited by the dogmas that we've been taught all our lives, but really appreciate what's what we have and what could be.
Well, these pieces are beautiful, and they're certainly containers of possibilities. And like I said, I've really admired these forms for a long time. And so, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? We got another minute here or so. Are you able to kind of give us a panorama maybe of your studio, or is there anything else you'd like to share?
My space. It's kind of a disaster, but that's kind of the process, I guess. Yeah, I think so. I don't just turn, I just want to share this with you too. That, sometimes wood is too pretty to paint. So this is a piece of burl, and it's turned into a sphere. This one I called Ova Nova, or Nova Ova, excuse me. Novas are exploding stars, and we are made of star stuff.
Right.
And so when a star explodes, it creates more things to make the universe out of. And so it's full of, this thing is full of like 32 little spheres of different kinds of wood. Whoops. So at any rate, Ova Nova. And then also I just like to turn a piece once in a while, just for the enjoyment of turning a piece. This is a whole form made out of, again, a burl wood. It's a maple burl.
Oh, that's lovely. Okay.
And
yeah, those are great.
And you want to do a quick view of the shop. This is my, I try and call this my clean space, but it's always the best way because I turn wood. But that's the corner where I take photographs of my work. Storage over here. I'll take you out. This is where I do the woodworking. This is my lathe. And so collection is important. Was that a bad tour? I'm sorry.
No, I think that's good. I'm
yeah,
gonna.
There we go. There's the lathe.
Yeah, yeah. There was a little muffling in there a little bit, but that's okay. It's an amazing workshop, and it's wonderful to see the space and all of these tools that are a part of your making, and that juxtaposed with how simple the final object is. These artifacts have this beauty that's very quiet, formally, and it's really nice. And thank you so much, Jay, for letting us come in and see your studio. And I look forward to seeing more of your work.
Thank you, Sean. It's been fun. I like I like talking about it, and what I really want people to do is experience the art. Whether it's mine or somebody else's, just kind of go in and see art and enjoy it and appreciate it. And again, don't shut down your emotions when you experience it, because I think that's what really visual art's all about, is asking you to experience what the artist has experienced. You may have a different interpretation entirely. Mm-hmm. That's fine. But feel the emotion, and you will get much more out of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right. Well, thank you, Jay, for your generosity, and take care.
Thank you.